All right, hey there, folks. Even though convention signings and other live events are getting back on track, I figured I'd keep bringing book tour to you. So, welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster, intriguing interviews with creative minds. So, we've talked a lot about crime and mystery on this show, but tonight we're going to be taking a trip into the past as we delve into historical mysteries. On our panel tonight is Edgar and Anthony Award nominee Nev March. Nev is the first Indian-born author to receive the Minotaur Books Mystery Writers of America for Best Crime Award for Best Crime Fiction. She also teaches creative writing at the Rutgers Osher Institute, and like myself, is a board member of the New York chapter of the Mystery Writers of America. Sorry. Welcome, Nev.
Hello, thanks for inviting me.
All right, good to see you. All right, also on our panel is musician and author Hal Glatzer, a former newspaper a former newspaper and television reporter. Hal now writes the Katie Green Historical Mystery Series. Welcome, Hal.
Hello, Russ.
All right, and rounding out our panel is Lambda and Anthony Award nominated Lev Rosen, writing for readers of all ages. Lev's work has been praised by the New York Times, BuzzFeed, Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and more. Welcome, Lev.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All right. Just a heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send notes or questions you have for the panel in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right. So when we talk about historical mysteries, we're setting stories that take place in a specific time and a specific place. But when you first think about writing an historical mystery, which comes first for you? The mystery or the time in which it's set? Let's start with you.
Well, if you're asking about the actual mystery plot itself, that's going to come second for me for sure. So definitely when I am setting up a book, when I'm setting up what I'm going to be writing about, it's about character and place initially. And once I have those figured out, then I can weave in what the mystery is going to be. And that usually has to bounce off the themes and the characters and the reason I'm even writing in that time period. Why was I gonna write in the 50s? How can I draw? How does that what's fascinating me about that, and how does that factor into the mystery? So it's definitely, for me, I start with the setting before I get to the actual ins and outs of who done it.
Why?
I think because I don't know if a book's going to be a mystery till I figured out what I'm writing about. I write across all the genres. So, I knew I wanted to write something with Lavender House and The Bell and the Fog. I knew I wanted to write about the pre-Stonewall queer community. And then as I was thinking about that, the thought that kept coming to mind was essentially being queer in the 50s was an inherently noir sort of life. It was about that paranoia. It was about the way things were always closing in. So it felt most naturally that it would be a mystery, a noir mystery.
Right. Okay. So Nev, what about you? Same question. When you sit down at your computer and you want to get something out on paper, what chicken and the egg, what's first? Is it character, setting, place, time, or is it the mystery itself? Like or do they kind of fuse almost simultaneously? What's the process for you?
Yeah, so almost simultaneously sounds about right. So my first book, Murder in Old Bombay, is based upon a real tragedy that occurred in 1891. So I set my first book in 1892, invented a sleuth, solved the murder. The mystery that the real mystery has not been solved in 130 years. So I have a fictional solution. And then I have a series. So it keeps going from there. There are pretty much 1893, 1894. And there might be a couple in the same year. But I'm actually constantly looking for what was happening in the world at the turn of the century. And I do pin, most of my books are pinned on real events. Sometimes I take a liberty with which month something happened in, but frankly, all the bizarre things in my books mostly did happen in real life.
Okay, fair enough. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more as we go along. So Hal, for you, when you think about an historical mystery as opposed to any other kind of mystery, do you start? Where do you start?
Well, to write pastiche stories of Sherlock Holmes and to be true to what Sherlockians call the canon, Arthur Conan Doyle's original 60 pieces, it has to be the late Victorian or early Edwardian period. And so I am limited by the knowledge of the world at the time, the politics, particularly of Europe, the limits of technology as they were understood.
So that part, I mean, I get that, but where does it start? I mean, and forget about Sherlock Holmes because you write other
Yes.
mysteries. So
you referenced my Katie Green stories, which are taking place in musical milieus just before the Second World War. I tend to immerse myself in the period. I tend to have a lot of period artifacts around me. I tend to have a lot of knowledge, a large knowledge base of things like what kind of clothes people wore and stuff. And then if I have the plot already, I can fit it into the scene. And on other occasions, the history or the turn of a screw historically will push me to write a story. I've got examples in the Holmes anthology that I'll talk about tonight. I've got some examples of both.
So it sounds like for you guys, almost pretty consistently, there's, the mystery itself seems to come is almost secondary because you're sort of, you have to be in the place before you can sort of reveal what happens next. All right, so we're talking about stories, and it doesn't have to be just the ones that you're working on. It's also, books you've read, TV you've watched, movies you've seen. How important is it to so let me rephrase it. How much research and to what extent do you either do or feel is necessary to capture the tone, the feel, and the details of the period in which the mystery is being set? So Nev, talk to me.
Oh boy, a lot. I can get sucked into it. It's quite a rabbit hole. When I was working on research for the first book, I ended up reading the histories of the 500 princely states that were part of India, and each of them has its own stories, and there's a lot of detail. But like Hal said, I do like to have the stuff around me, so I don't know if you can see this. I'm putting it up near the camera. This is, believe it or not, a tiny little magnifying glass that is actually a keychain, and it's about 100 years old. It was something that my grandmother had, and I recently found, and it's just charming.
Why? Was she a tiny little person?
She was not a detective, no. She just couldn't see very well, so she would actually put it over the addresses to read. But I also have, I don't know if you can see these, money
what is that?
from before the First World War. It's
hold on,
like Bismarckian doll.
Hold those up. Hold those up to the camera. I want to see that.
Bismarckian pounds. If I turn them, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Look at that.
And then I have a stack this thick. So they are not worth anything. Obviously, they are from before the First World War. But this kind of stuff fascinates me because it's just charming, and I know that somewhere I will use it.
Why isn't the currency worth anything?
So the government failed. It got taken over, and
that
demonetized essentially. Yes.
Wow.
So yeah.
Okay, so you really like to get into the weeds of it, but what do you think what does that bring to the narrative?
Yeah, there's a certain authenticity that comes from having, being in the place, or having real artifacts, or videos are great, certainly. And there's a lot of wonderful period research that you can do in videos, but nothing beats going to the actual place and feeling and smelling and touching things and walking around in there. And since we're talking about the past, it's hard because most places have, been renovated. There are tiny little spots in India, particularly, that are like time capsules, Parts of Simla haven't changed. Parts of Pune, there's still cantonment. You can walk around there, and there are little blocks on the side of the road where you would dismount if you were on a horse. Those kinds of things you just can't beat.
That's right. So Hal, what about you? When you're specific to an historical mystery, how much research and how important is to you that you get the minutia accurate?
Absolutely important. People will call you on it. People who know more about the period than I do will certainly say, what do you mean? It was this and the other way. But I want to be as accurate as possible. When I wrote Katie Green mystery set on the SS Lurleen en route from San Francisco to Hawaii in the week before Pearl Harbor, I actually had the deck plan. I had a brochure from the Lurleen with the deck plan tacked up on my wall. I was living in San Francisco at the time, so I could get a sense of how you had to go through the ship to get from A to B and a rough idea of how long it would take to do that, because that could make a difference in a scene.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you say that, just because my most recent book takes place on a cruise ship. It's a Galaxy cruise ship, but I spent a lot of time dealing with which room, what's on which deck, and where's the staircase versus the the elevator, and where are the windows, and where are the mechanicals, and where's the food, and where are the guest rooms, and where are the restaurants, and how do you go from here to there?
It's not to say that you have to be slavish. I mean, I did want to know what phase the moon was in when Katie goes out on deck, during that week, and you can find that. An almanac and online will tell you. But there's a couple of things in a different story, in A Fugue in Hell's Kitchen, set here in Hell's Kitchen in New York. It's 1939, but for the sake of the plot, I needed a morning tabloid newspaper that it was jingoistic and lurid, and the Daily Mirror came to mind, and I used it. But I happen to know that the Daily Mirror in 1939 was an afternoon paper, and all I can say is too bad. That's something that, I suppose some expert will call me on, but nobody's ever called me on it before, because it wasn't crucial to the story. I needed a story to emerge in the morning.
Right. Okay, good. So Lev, what about you? So, research, is it just sort of, do you just like to sprinkle in a few details, or do you feel like you have to kind of crawl inside the setting?
I mean, with me, so much of it is specifically about this history that has been completely erased in many ways. Queer history is something that is constantly erased, or we're told doesn't exist. And so being able to get all that research done and getting that stuff in there is sort of a way of also being like, hey, we were here. Like, it's, queer history is one of those things that queer people aren't taught growing up. I'm Jewish. I was taught my Jewish heritage growing up. I was not raised gay. So for queer readers, then obviously my books are for everyone, yada, yada, yada. But when I'm thinking about queer readers, this is history that they don't know about themselves. And so all these little details I can get in are ways of expanding their own sense of self. And that is exciting.
Give me one example.
So leaving aside the fact that a lot of people don't really have any idea about what queer activism was before Stonewall, my favorite, and I also put this, my favorite pre-Stonewall queer rights organization is the Mattachine Society. They were not great. They were by today's standards very bad, but I find them very charming in a adorable way. And I put them in my young adult writing as well because of that. So the Mattachine Society was a pre-Stonewall gay rights organization, and their mentality was that the only thing that made queer people different was who they were attracted to, and therefore the best way to be a queer activist was to behave as straight as possible, except for that one thing. So to essentially be as normal as possible, normal in quotes.
Right.
And so the story I always tell is they would have these meetings, and there was one very butch lesbian who would come to these meetings, and the first time she walked across the room in heels, everyone applauded. They were so thrilled because she was behaving like a lady. And so like that stuff, that part of queer history is so interesting, and the research is so much fun. World War II was so gay. You know, there's all this stuff that you get to explore that people don't know about, and I think getting to show it to people, straight people, gay people, is really exciting, and doing it in a fun way makes it more fun.
Fair enough. All right. So do you consider the time, the place in which your story exists to be another character? And if so, how well do you want to know that character? So Lev, keep it going.
Yeah, I mean, here's my my prop, my little show and tell. My books take place in 1952 San Francisco. This is a reproduction of a tourist's map from 1952 of San Francisco.
Oh, hold it up again.
Oh my gosh, it's that's where I put my notes of where things are. And then
you're moving around too fast. We can't say.
All right, I'm going slow now.
Wow.
I don't know what's on the screen when I cover my face. So.
I think we finally caught your good side.
Okay.
I'm just teasing it.
You sound like my mother. Yeah, no. So I think San Francisco, and like having to write about 1950 San Francisco, it is in its way a character. Yes, I would agree with that 100%. I think that it is also it's also a character that I have to know how much of it to show. You know, you don't want to get carried away from the mystery by being like, and by the way, there were on this one corner, there was this particular drug shop run by this lady, and I discovered in my research all this, that, and the other. Right. And so it becomes this, and the same holds true for the queer research. It becomes this sort of game of like, how much gets in there before it becomes overwhelming and takes away from the story.
Right. Don't try to show off by how clever, how smart you think you are by all the little things you found.
Just because you learn something cool doesn't mean it gets to go in the book.
Right. Right.
Sad, but yeah.
Right. Kill your darlings. All right. What about you? You know, to you, is the setting, is it, do you feel like it's its own character that needs to come alive, or is it just kind of like the place where it happens?
Oh, it comes alive, and it has to do with the plot, right? Historical mysteries done right, the story couldn't have existed in any other place and time, because the context, the history of that place, that the events that are happening, or the social construct at the time, they are very much relevant to the plot. So yeah, the place and the time is very much a character. The geography of it, I want to say, is extremely important, but also things do change over time. And when you situate something, you know, not just, you know, were there telephones, were there telegraphs, were there cars, were there planes? It's not even that big. It's the little pieces. Since we talked about mysteries on cruise ships, I'll put up my picture because lo and behold, there's a cruise ship on it. But this, although we use the QE2 as the picture for the boat, my story actually does, the Spanish diplomat's secret, it does occur before there was telegraph on ships. So while they're on a transatlantic journey, they actually cannot communicate with the ports.
Wow, right. They're actually cut off.
Sorry?
They're cut off from...
They are cut off. They are absolutely isolated from the events in the world. There could be a world war and they wouldn't know it until they actually dock. So the details do matter, because that one decision changes the plot completely. Would they know or would they not know something? But it's more the sights and smells and sounds and feel of the place. You know, whether it is a grand canvas like India, colonial India, or China, or whether it's just a tiny microscopic canvas like one single ship, you can still make it very real by doing the right research and including the right stuff.
So with you, I know I already know the answer because you said it, but I'll follow up since we're talking. So when you're thinking about historical mysteries, is it more important that you're just simply focused on a specific time and place? Or for you, Nev, we know the answer, but just follow up real quick. Is it more important just to set it in a place or to base it on a true event or true figures from history?
I like having true events included, especially things that aren't entirely explained. I like drawing a line through real events to have the story then explain them, because it could have happened that way, right? You want to have that sense of believability about it. But I do make up stuff. And then, where I have moved something around, I'll usually do a mea culpa at the end in the author's notes and say, okay, look, I know that the Parliament of World Religions really happened in September, but for the purpose of my story, I moved it to July. It's not that big of a change, but it needed to all happen at the same time. And yes, Swami Vivekananda was there and J.N. Tata was there, but I just moved it by 2 months because I know somebody will tell me that that's not right.
So how for you? So again, kind of same question. When you're writing an historical mystery, is it more important that you're simply focused on a specific time and a place, or do you like to base the mysteries on either true events, real figures from history, or both?
I've incorporated as much real history as I can. Part of the answer to your question lies in point of view. Practically every piece of fiction I've ever written is told in the first person. In writing the Sherlock Holmes stories, I'm writing in Watson's voice, although one of the stories I put in Holmes's own voice. My Katie Green novels are narrated by Katie herself in first person female of the period. And so I have to be true to what a real person in that era, the Holmesian, late Victorian, early Edwardian period, the life in America in the years leading up to the Second World War. I have to condition my story on what it was possible, not merely there wasn't television in any way other than the World's Fair, so I can't have a TV set in the thing. I can't do anything that is blazingly anachronistic. And that goes for how my characters talk. I need the slang of the period or the words that were in common use in the period, even if they're not in common use today. Now, that said, you need a little bit of a workaround. There's also things that if the story were actually written, like when Conan Doyle was writing Sherlock Holmes, he never once mentioned that the streets reeked of horse manure. Okay, but if you were around in 1895, believe me, you knew what the streets of London smelled like. I suppose Bombay, Bombay must have had a similar sense. It's just something, it's interesting to find a way to sneak something like that in for the modern reader. You have to do it in context.
No, it's a good point, and it kind of leads into my next question. And this is kind of one I really wanted this. We're going to dig into this one. All right. One issue, it's come up a lot over the last, I think, several years, is recency bias. Many books, TV shows, movies are telling stories set in historical periods, but they're written almost through a modern social lens. So how do you feel about that? Are you okay sort of infusing modern ideals, modern concepts, and applying them to the past almost as if you're retconning history? Or do you feel that you have to honor the customs of the day, even if those customs, were distasteful? So Lev, we'll start with you.
I mean, I think that's a complicated question, and I think that the recency bias, as you called it, I think it's worth noting that there's also a bias about how we view the past. You know, we tend to look at the past and be like, oh, well, it was XYZ. But the more we uncover about marginalized communities, especially in the past, the more we realize that the past was a significantly more complex and diverse, you know, whichever period we're talking about, period, than we have been led to believe growing up. So the idea of imposing sort of modern ideals on the past isn't necessarily as foreign as you might think, because if you look at the past, oftentimes a lot of people possessed certain modern ideals. There are, you know, aspects that I think are more complicated. Language, for example. There are certain words that we would never use today that were much more commonly used back then. I personally try to avoid those just because I think a modern reader will often be put off by them, if that makes sense. Although at the same time, I don't have problem using a lot of slurs against gay people that were historical, because I'm a queer person and I'm like, that's realistic. So I think it's complicated, and I think it varies a lot depending on who's writing and who you are picturing reading. But just because you are incorporating, you know, certain ideals that might not necessarily feel like they come from the time period, that doesn't mean they don't come from the time period. And if you do your research right, you can usually show that.
Right, right. Okay. Well, Nev, what about you? How do you feel about, you know, the idea of, you know, setting a whether it's a mystery or not, you know, writing some sort of historical fiction, you know, whether it's 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, but sort of writing it as if our cultural standards, the way we think, the way society is formed, as if hundreds of years ago, it would really is just a reflection of today. Like, how do you feel about that? Yes, no, maybe?
Yeah, so I struggled with this one, especially in my second book, Peril at the Exposition. I have a trans character, and in 1893, that is, you know, quite an astonishing thing. Not accepted in general, except maybe in Berlin. It might have been more accepted in Europe. But the name, the word didn't even exist, right? So when I wrote the story, I had my editor at Macmillan asked me, you know, for permission to send it over to an authenticity reader. And I got like a lot of feedback, right, about half of which I agreed with. But what it was really doing was softening the text, changing around a lot of the, you know, the connotations, the way I had worded things, which were more authentic to the time. She wanted to soften the language and to give the character more agency, things that would be more palatable to a modern reader. And so we had quite a lot of back and forth over this, I will admit. I felt I was being untruthful to the past because I wanted to be historically accurate. And ultimately, I gave in on a lot of them because even though something's historically accurate, you don't want to reinforce those negative things in the modern reader's mind. We want to move the modern reader, we have a responsibility to move the modern reader to a more accepting, kinder point of view. And as an advocate, you know,
but I mean,
yeah.
I'm asking, but do we have that responsibility to,
I felt
I
we
mean, is it
did. Yeah.
it's in its own way? And I'm not
Oh,
answering, I'm just asking.
yeah,
But
yeah.
is there a danger though in, you know, this is kind of what I was getting into. If you say, well, the language was ugly in a, you know, at a certain period,
Yeah.
attitudes were hateful and ugly and distasteful, and that all may be true. And I don't want to, you know, I don't want to, as a reader, I don't want to read that. But if you're intentionally reading something that's set at a certain time in history, and if those were the actual attitudes, if those were the actual language, the way people treated each other, by softening what was real is that actually, are we kind of setting a new standard, or are we actually lowering them? Are we telling people that you are not mature enough to handle what the world really was? I'm not saying it's pretty, you may not have liked it, but that's just kind of how it was. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
What do you think?
So it's an excellent point, Russ. The issue is not so much can they handle it, it's what do we want to perpetrate. And because the book is first person point of view, the first person, I think, in my opinion, it represents the reader. We're leading them in a way to think like that character, or interpret the world through that character's lens. And so I thought it was the right thing to do to actually modify, soften some of that language. Now, when the trans character Abigail reveals what happened to her, there we can lay out what reality or what history was really like, because there she is narrating something and it is in her words, versus having that attitude come from the dominant or the point of view character, your main character. So how it's done, and it's a fine line. I thought a lot of them, a lot of those changes, but ultimately I did come to realize that I felt I had a responsibility to the reader, to the modern reader, to try and move them towards a more accepting, positive point of view, rather than just regurgitating what it might have been like. Again, it's imagination, what
Right,
it might have been like.
So you wanted to
that
be
time.
be more aspirational.
Yes, yes.
Right. Okay. What about you? How do you feel about the idea of, imposing more modern sensibilities on, previous periods of time?
I ain't gonna do it. If I want modern sensibility, I'll put it in my new book set in 2018. If I'm going to set a story in the past, I have to be true enough to the past to drop the reader into the pool. K.D. Green, my character in the years before Second World War, takes umbrage when someone uses an ethnic slur in her presence. But she doesn't sit and she doesn't immediately say, that's not a nice thing to do. I'll bet some years from now, people are really going to be upset when no. She complains about it to the reader, but she goes on because she needs to ask this person something critical to solving the mystery that she's found herself in. And she's just got to live with people around her in her time.
Okay, so
as I say, if I'm going to use modern sensibilities, it should be in a modern novel, in a novel set in the present day.
All right, fair enough. So along those lines, you brought up an interesting point, which leads to one of my next questions. So with historical mysteries, the narrator can fill the pages with all sorts of details and observations about the time. But how important is it to you, whether you're the writer or you're the reader, to experience the time, the setting, the culture through the character's eyes, rather than the narrator's eyes, if they're not the same? So Hal, why don't you keep going?
I believe in immersing my reader in the era. I was for a long time a member and an officer of the Art Deco Society of California. I met a lot of people who were even more knowledgeable about the years between the world wars. That's how I know a lot about the clothes. I know that woolen clothes itch. I know what girls' shoes called Mary Janes are. I can put the reader into a scene and into a book and into a time of the world that they were not born into, and they could not possibly have been born into because they're alive now. I think it's very important to stick to the time and to be as immersive as you possibly can without going overboard, as we talked a few minutes ago, without slipping in every little thing you ever learned about that period.
Right. So Lev, so for you, same thing, when you're writing or reading historical, whether it's historical fiction, historical mysteries, how important it is to you, there's a distinction between, what as the author can write, can describe the setting and what's happening, and actions that are taking place, but how important it is to you that either when you're the reader or you're writing it, that the reader be able to experience that setting through their eyes, not through the author's eyes.
I'm trouble here because my historical novels are first person as well, so
so they're the same.
Yeah, it's you know, they're the same thing. So we experience everything through my detective Andy's eyes and the way he sees the world and what has happened to him. And you know, when I'm thinking about what he would see and the details he might pick out when describing a place or something, that can sometimes be a little bit of a battle because, you know, you want you want to get this detail in, you want to get that detail in, but Andy wouldn't care. But I think also part of that is about creating a narrator that sees the world the way you want to write it.
Interesting. All right, just a quick interlude for folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments for the panel, put them in the chat box and we'll get to a few at the end. So Nev, I got a question. So where do you think the line is, or is there a line between writing an historical mystery versus an alternate history?
So this is a big one for me. I'm actually a little disturbed by the current trend to write alternate histories as if that they are really history. Bridgerton, even Hamilton, where all the characters are played by Black people. Well, all of those were really white people, you know. But nowhere do we make that point. We just assume that, oh, this is a fantasy, so we can get away with all this rewriting of history. Alternate histories are delicious. The Man in the High Castle, you know, there's some fantastic books out there, but I think they have to be clearly labeled as fantasy or as speculative fiction. It's a new genre. It's fairly new, you know, relative.
Is it?
Yeah, I don't think it's more than maybe a couple of decades old. But
well, I mean, The Man in the High Castle, I mean, it's Philip K. Dick. I mean, this was what, 60, 70 years ago when he wrote this.
Possibly, so maybe older. But I guess the key there is to label correctly, because believe it or not, younger folks may not have the same clear lens that we older folks have. And frankly, not everyone, even in our generation, has a clear lens of what history was like. People from other cultures are watching these TV series and things and going, oh, was that really? You could have a Duke or Duchess who was Black? No, you could not be a Duke or Duchess if you were Black at that time. I'm sorry. You know, so the rewriting of history as fiction, it's charming if it's stories, it's fantasy, but it's very disturbing and troublesome when not correctly labeled. And I think it's actually disruptive. It destroys some of the real awareness that we should have. And you know, it destroys some of the present day biases and the understanding of where they come from.
So I'm just going to play
when we rewrite those.
I'm going to play a little devil's advocate with you, because I feel like you're actually contradicting yourself, only in that here you're saying you have a responsibility to not embellish on the past. And 5 minutes ago, you said that, well, I got a lot of pushback and I actually did rewrite many details that were not accurate because I wanted to be aspirational. So in your mind, where's the distinction?
There's no disconnect, actually. You know, it is a unified vision. So if my character you know, is bad mouthing some minority, that is a negative thing, and I wanted to change that because I want to put my character, the main character, should represent the reader. I don't want to encourage them bad mouthing minorities. So I will change that, and I did, because although the world was like that, I don't want to encourage readers to be like that. So by you know, repeating my earlier slant, it's where you want to take people, but that doesn't mean that I hide the bad stuff that happened in the past completely. We're not whitewashing the past. We're showing it very much how it was, but putting that in in the context of other people having done things to the character, or this is how the world is narrating it, describing it, but not having your main character own those bad attitudes.
All right.
So there is no contradiction.
I agree to disagree. Okay, Lev, what about you? Where do you think the line is, or is there a line between historical mysteries and alternate histories?
Well, I mean, we're talking about fiction, so everything is alternate history. You know, none of these characters existed. So it's all in some way or another a historical fantasy. It's just a matter of, you know, how much you're creating that feels unlikely or completely unrealistic. And, you know, I wrote my first novel, which is over a decade ago, was a steampunk novel. You know, that took place in a Victorian London where Ada Byron's life had been saved by this fictional character, and there was mad science happening all over the place, stuff that just was not real. I completely changed the history, but I changed it in a way that made sense to me using like particular rules. So that's definitely alternate history. Are my historical mysteries alternate history because they're fiction? I don't know. I mean, I do all this research. The queer community in San Francisco that I'm writing about existed, even if the specific gay bars I am making up, they're inspired by real gay bars. We have to make stuff up. So on some level, it's all alternate history.
Well, so let me maybe we need to parse that a little bit more, just as an example. I don't know if any of you guys are science fiction fans or history fans. So there's a show on Apple called For All Mankind.
Yes, I love it. I love it.
So it
But see
posits,
that, yeah,
right?
Russ.
So it posits. Hang on. So it
Yeah.
posits, if you haven't seen it, that the Russians beat us into space back in the 60s, and that many historical figures from our history did advance through their history, but the presidents were different. Some of the players moved around. They were not in the same place. It's very clearly an alternate version of our actually real life, rather than saying, well, this is pretty much how it happened, but this guy had a company that maybe didn't exist. You know, that those little details, I think that's just fiction by itself. I'm talking about when you're actually presenting critical changes in the social structure that just did not exist in actuality. You know, very, very significant elements.
Right. And that's the bottom line, Russ, is the alternate history is definitely a different, it is not historically accurate. Let's put it that way. It is a history that didn't happen. It did Germany win the Second World War? You know, it's those kinds of completely inaccurate histories, but still make delightful stories. What if?
Right. Okay, that's great. But now it's a time on the show where we spin the wheel on the wheel of 7 possible categories, some of which I created just for the show. And the categories are: dinner is served, judge, jury, and executioner, stranger in a strange land, moving day, secret superstitious, looper duper, and everyone's favorite, kick him in the junk. All right, Lev, you're up first. You ready?
All right. I don't know what's happening.
I don't know. Well, we're going to spin the wheel, and whatever you get, that's what you're going to get. And you got moving day. What is moving day? Good God, what did I come up with today? All right. So the forces of the universe have decided that you no longer belong in the modern world. Being the person you are now, you can travel to the past or the future. You will live out the rest of your days there. Where on the globe is your new home, and in what time period?
So I get to pick time and place.
Time and place.
But it has to be on Earth.
Yes.
Well, that's fun. I can't go to space in the future.
Well, if we were on a sci-fi panel, that you would have had that option, but we're not.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what the future holds, and it might not be good at all. But I think that I would be very curious to remain in New York, because I'm born and raised New Yorker, and if I leave, my powers start to fade. But I'd go back to the mid 60s. I think I would want to watch everything that was happening in terms of civil rights, in terms of how the city changed, in terms of music. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
All right, 60s in New York. All right. Okay, Nev, you're up next. You ready?
Hey,
All right, what do we got? Round and round. And you got Looper Duper. What the hell is this? All right, if you could choose just one single day from your life that you could live over and over, caught in a loop, which one would it be?
oh my goodness, caught in an endless loop? I don't know that I want a single day to be in an endless loop.
That's
But if it could be a loop just as long as I would like it, then yeah, there are days in
no,
my
no, no.
life
That's
that I
no
would like to
one,
repeat.
one day.
One day.
That's it.
One day. Yeah, I guess I would like to meet my great-grandparents again. And this time, hopefully I'm older and I can ask them a whole bunch of questions.
Okay. Well, when you met them, where were you?
Sorry,
When you first met them, where were you?
where was I? So, okay, place and time. This would be Hubli, which is in South India, and it would have been in 1969, maybe.
All right, 1969. All right, so we got a 60s theme going on here. All right. Al, you're up next. Let's see what we got.
If you remember the 60s, you weren't there.
All right, secret superstitious for you. All right, what do we got here? All right, so Hal, even the most strident naysayers will admit in private that they have at least one superstition. What's yours?
I don't have a superstition. I don't believe there are such things. I think it's a quirk of the mind. I don't think that I think there's enough things in the world to be afraid of or careful about. You don't need to invent new ones.
All right, well, when next time I see you and I watch you,
Can
when I see you
answer-
step over a crack in the sidewalk, I'm going to bust you.
I do all that stuff. Can I answer each of the previous two
No.
questions?
No, you may not. Sorry, snooze you lose. That's not how it works. All right, so now we're gonna pick your poison. I've got four choices for you: A, B, C, or D. I'm not gonna tell you what's behind each one, but I will say that they're all well. We got a couple of mix and matches here. So, all right, Nev, you're up first. A, B, C, or D.
I just picked one?
Pick one.
D.
D. Oh boy, we're gonna give you some truth serum. All right, you ready? I got 10. I got 10 crime and historical mystery questions for you. All right, here we go. Favorite fictional crime-related character?
Sherlock Holmes.
Cozy mysteries or hard-boiled detective stories?
Cozies.
Okay, weirdest criminal case you ever heard about?
Weirdest criminal case. Weirdest criminal case. Oh gosh, there's too many to tell you.
Pick one.
The woman who ate her husband's tongue. Ew. Weird.
Unsolved mystery you'd most want the answer to?
Unsolved mystery I most want the answer to. Oh gosh, there's again the Bermuda Triangle.
Oh, okay, good one. All right, so I think we already know the answer to the next one, but Sherlock Holmes or Nick and Nora Charles?
Oh, Holmes, yeah. I do like Nick and Nora, but still.
Okay. Deadliest foe, Jack the Ripper or Moriarty?
Ooh. Oh, we just found out who Jack the Ripper was, but I think Moriarty's deadlier.
All right. Favorite historical mystery movie?
Historical mystery movie. Oh gosh, and now again, there's just too many. Actually, the recent one was pretty darn good. The Haunting in Venice. That had some wonderful turns and twists and wacky changes.
All right. Favorite century for historical mysteries?
Oh, the Victorian era, 1800s.
All right. Favorite 20th century decade for historical mysteries?
Decade. Okay, so the Hammett and Chandler decades, right? So what, 40s and 50s?
Okay. All right. Going back way. All right. Historical mystery you'd like to see made into a movie, and you can't pick one of your own.
Oh, darn it. Okay, historical mystery I would like to see made into movie. Sujata Massey's Widows of Malabar Hill. Oh, can I do one more? Abir Mukherjee's Smoke and Ashes. Again, just wonderful historicals that are so vivid.
Okay. All right, Hal, you're up next. You got A, B, or C?
B.
B. All right. B. Okay. Oh, this is all right. Well, now we're going to go from historical to modern. As a new system thrust upon us seemingly overnight, AI is sinking its digital teeth into just about every part of modern life. What do you think about the impact that AI is having now on fiction, or does it not apply?
I think it hasn't shown itself in its full bloom yet. I think in the next, let's say, 5 years, we'll be inundated with books and other creative media that have been generated from neural networks.
Well, I hope you're wrong, but I fear you could be right. All right, Lev, you got A or C?
A.
All right, A. All right, we're going to go to our advice column. All right, and our advice, and what's my question here? Where are we? Here we go. Okay, for our fellow writers out there who are writing, what's the best advice you can offer our writers out there about their own historical mysteries?
There's a lot of advice I could offer. I think I'm going to give what I think is an excellent bit of research advice. If you are writing anything that takes place during a time period when people lived that could still be alive, go to Facebook and find a sort of like, I remember when group. I do this for San Francisco all the time, where they post old photos from 1950 San Francisco and tell these weird stories about like the man at the soda shop who would always give them a particular type of candy on Fridays or something like that. It's a gold mine of weird little details of these historical places and times, and photos galore.
All right, fair enough. All right, guys, so we're coming up on the end of the segment. I'm going to share my screen, and we've got some goodies to share with everyone. So give me 1 second, and we'll be right there. All right, here we go. Okay, what do we got here? Okie dokie. So, Hal, what do we got here? What are we looking at?
We're looking at 5 adventures of Sherlock Holmes. They were previously published in anthologies in the UK over the course of the couple of years that the pandemic was on, and publishers weren't taking a lot of the other stuff I was trying to flog. So I decided to self-publish my own anthology. They're all true to the canon. That is to say, they are set in the classic time that you think of Sherlock Holmes, the 1880s up through the first years of the 20th century. They are as historically accurate in terms of the background as I could possibly make them. I think I've given Holmes some interesting puzzles. I've put him together with historical figures. That's what historical fiction and historical mystery fiction is all about. They're not alternate histories. We distinguished between those two genres a few minutes ago, but they're ripping good yarns.
All right, great. All right, everyone, if you're a fan of Sherlock Holmes, check these out. All right, Nev, you talked a little bit about it before, so just take a breath. So just set the scene for us. Where are we, and what's the crux of what this is about?
Gotcha. Yeah, so Captain Jim Agniotri is on a ship with his bride, Diana. And she's a Parsi, she's Parsi, they're an immigrant couple. He's a detective and she kind of helps him out. They're going from New York to Liverpool, and he has a job, he says, in Liverpool in England. And it's 1894. And there's, of course, an international cast on board. So when a foreign diplomat, a Spanish diplomat, is brutally murdered, he's assigned the job of finding the killer before they dock. So he has 6 days in which to do it. And of course, there's a ticking clock, because if they don't find the answer, there's a potential for war between, I guess, England and Spain at that time. So he's got 1,000 suspects on board, and he's got a locked room crime. Of course, it's a closed set because the killer is still on board. They can't leave. It's a transatlantic journey. And to add to his troubles, he's acutely seasick. So enjoy The Spanish Diplomat's Secret.
All right, fantastic. All right, and Lev, talk to me. What do we got?
Lavender House is the first Andy Mills mystery, and it also just won the McCavity Award for Best Historical Mystery.
Fantastic.
And it takes place in 1952 San Francisco. Andy Mills has just been fired from his job as a member of the San Francisco police force after being caught in a raid on a gay club. He is out of a job, out of an apartment, because they told his landlord he was queer, and he is contemplating suicide when a woman sits down next to him at the bar and asks him to solve the murder of her wife, with very little left to lose and the promise of more money and more alcohol to go out on. He accepts the case, going back with her to her home, the titular Lavender House, which is a beautiful estate outside San Francisco where the LaMontagne family lives. And the LaMontagne family runs a soap empire. And because they are a soap empire, they have to look squeaky clean, which means that even though Pearl, who masqueraded as the personal assistant to Irene LaMontagne, the matriarch of the empire, was actually her lover, and Irene's son is also queer, but to cover that up, he has married a lesbian in what was called a lavender marriage back then for appearances, but has a boyfriend, and his wife has a girlfriend. So in this cast of characters, someone has died. Irene has died suspiciously, and Andy goes there to solve the crime, but in the process of doing so also starts to see what it's like to live in a somewhat out fashion, a gilded cage. That's what their life is like, where they can be free and easy within the walls of Lavender House, but must maintain a facade outside of it. And within that, he has to solve a murder.
Wow, that sounds great. Everyone, check it out, because I know I'm going to myself. All right. So as for me, since our theme is historical mysteries on theme, I'm going to encourage you to check out Murder in Montague Falls. Murder in Montague Falls are 3 noir novellas. They all take place in the same fictional town of Montague Falls. The protagonists are all teenagers, but I assure you, this is not YA. This is definitely adult fiction. The teenagers, however, all went to the same high school, but the 3 tales are set in 3 separate decades. The first one takes place, that I wrote, in the 1980s during the Russian Red Scare, and it's very loose, and I say loosely based on something that happened to me. A paperboy is out collecting on his route one night, peeks in through the window, can't really see, thinks he sees one of his elderly customers get murdered, freaks out, doesn't know what to do, ultimately decides to investigate it himself. The second one takes place in the 1990s during the Satanic Panic, based on the West Memphis 3, where this girl, high school girl Natalie, is obsessed with Satanism, the dark arts, pentagrams, and these 2 dim bulbs who are best friends are both vying for her attention. She uses that to manipulate them, to drag them deeper into her world, to some very grisly results. And the last one actually takes place in the 1950s. Classic noir, sultry high school teacher seduces one of her students in the hopes that he will murder her husband. And that's it for me. So Murder in Montague Falls is, so you get 3 for the price of 1. It's myself, Sawney Hatton, and Patrick Thomas. It's available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. All right, folks, that's our show. I want to thank my guests. I got Hal and Lev and Nev for talking historical mysteries tonight, and I want to thank everyone who's watching at home. I hope you had a great time. If you haven't already, be sure to follow me on social media and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro, and as always, be kind, be gentle, be generous of spirit, and go read a book. And I'll see you all next week for our 2023 season finale. All right, folks, thanks a lot and take care. Bye now.